Hi, it's Jan Beta, and I am going to do something that I procrastinated doing for quite a while now. You probably remember the Commodore 16 that I refurbished and future-proofed in one of the previous videos. If you haven't watched that, I recommend watching that. Of course, I'm going to link it in the corner there and in the description below. Yeah, the Commodore 16 is part of the Commodore 264 series or the TAT series. There's a lot of names for this series, which basically was planned as a relatively low budget small business kind of thing to complement the C64 series, and it ended up by some mismanagement being perceived by many customers as the new C64, and it was sold at a price point that also suggested that at the time. But this is of course not compatible with the Commodore 64, as you probably know, but many people at the time didn't know and bought this. Especially because this looked a lot like the C64, because management decided it should be put in this C64 shaped case, bread bin style, and yeah, people were misled by that, which in turn led to this whole series of computers, which also included the Plus4, famously failed. There are some exceptions though. Hungary, this machine sold quite well. In Germany, these sold quite well because they were discounted a lot. There's a lot of people in the UK who have these and got these when they were discounted. It was sold as a kind of a kit with a basic course and a dataset, I believe. So people could learn basic programming at a relatively low cost, which was great, of course. Good idea to save these, but these were only produced for a short period of time, and Commodore didn't make much profit on these, I believe, so they focused on making other computers later on. And these were relatively short-lived because they weren't selling as well as Commodore had planned. So the Commodore 16 by many regarded as the most useful of these machines because it has the larger case, proper keyboard. I personally like the Plus4 a lot better because it's a lot smaller and I think I like the keyboard on the Plus4. Yeah, opinions vary on that. This has virtually the same keyboard, at least from the outside and from the feeling of it, as the C64, which arguably is not the best keyboard in the world, but for the time it was an okay keyboard, I guess, for a home computer like this. Another upside that this has is that there's much more room in this case than there is in the flat Plus4. So you have room for air circulation, and in this particular one I put heat sinks on the chips that get hot quite a bit. So that makes sense if you want to use this as your everyday kind of retro computer, which I believe some people do, because this was the first computer many people had. The main difference this has to the Plus4 computer is that it only has 12K of free memory in BASIC. That means it had 16 kilobytes total memory, whereas the Plus4 series had 64 kilobytes of memory, which of course makes it a lot more useful because 16K is pretty low. So the C16 only having 16 kilobytes leads to a lot of software that was made for the Plus4, as well as a lot of software actually that was developed after these were discontinued, which also was developed for 64 kilobytes of RAM, is not working on a stock Commodore 16. You can pretty easily upgrade these to 64 kilobytes because they basically use the same architecture. So everything for managing 64K of memory is already built into this. This just has two 8 kilobyte RAM chips in there that can quite easily be replaced with 32 kilobyte RAM chips, so you get a total of 64 kilobytes of RAM. And that's what I'm going to do today. So I actually did quite some research before attempting this, and yeah, partially it's an excuse for why this video took so long to make, which doesn't really hold up very well. So there are some methods of doing this that are kind of plug and play. There is a way of doing the 64K RAM mod now without any modifications to the mainboard. So there's a socket that sits on the TAT chip, I believe. And yeah, basically you have the RAM on there and have the TAT is socketed on all of the machines I've seen, so you don't need to desolder anything, you don't have to solder, you just plug in, you take out the TAT, plug in the little circuit board, and plug the TAT on top of that. There's a socket on there, and you have 64K of RAM, which is of course neat for people who can't solder. Just as a little warning, I don't want to be responsible for you bricking your Commodore 16. Do everything at your own risk, okay? So I'm going to try to not brick this one and show you which of the solutions for a 64K RAM mod I chose to do. So as I mentioned, there's actually quite a few different methods to do this. I did some research, and the plug-and-play versions with little PCBs mostly involve desoldering chips as well. I am going with a method I found in Tynemouth Software's blog, which is Dave Curran of Tynemouth Software, who is responsible for designing most of the original hardware that the Future Was 8-bit sells. If you don't know Future Was 8-bit, should definitely check them out. They have a lot of new peripherals for old retro computers. I'm going to link that in the description. I'm not sponsored or anything. I'm just they just make good stuff, and I can recommend it without even being sponsored. So yeah, Dave has a blog that I'm also going to link in below, where he shares his experience with repairs and tinkering with old systems as he goes. Very well written, like his humor, and very informative stuff. And he has made a roundup kind of thing about different methods of modding the Commodore 16 to have 64 kilobytes of memory. And I decided to do the reversible method that he mentioned in his blog, because I think that's the most reasonable thing to do. Also, there's a lot of mods that involve putting in a switch to switch it back to the original 16K. But I found, after looking around the whole internet, basically, that there's virtually no software that doesn't run with 64 kilobytes of memory. I read on some blogs that there are supposedly some programs that don't run with the RAM upgrade, but I couldn't find any. So if you have any idea or have experienced software crashing on this with the 64K mod in place, please let me know in the comments or via email or something like that. Just contact me and tell me, because I didn't find any software that is not working with 64K, which makes sense because there was another system that is virtually the same but with 64K. So software was made for 16K, and some software was made for the Plus 4, which should also run on this after it has been upgraded to 64K. So I don't know which software doesn't run. I'm not going to put a switchable mod in this. I'm just going to put the reversible mod in this that Tynemouth Software mentioned on his blog. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Without further ado, let's open this up and I'm going to explain how the mod is done. So here we are. This is the whole PCB that is in the Commodore 16, As you've probably noticed, this is a lot smaller than the case, which is because of Commodore initially planning to put these into the smaller form factor cases, like the +4 ended up in, and this is just using the C64 style Bretman case was just an afterthought. So we are looking at these two chips, which are 8 kilobyte DRAM chips, dynamic RAM chips. 4416 is the designator for these chips. U5 and U6 are the silkscreen designators. You want to use chips for this mod that have a 464 as the last digits. So you can use these 4464s, you can use like 41464s, I believe there's a whole number of 42464s. There's a number of chips that are usable for these. I'm going to link in the description a list of chips that are suitable for this mod. You have to desolder these because these are 8 kilobytes each. You can solder in these, which are 32 kilobytes each. And you see that they are the same size, so we don't need to do any strange workarounds there. I'm going to desolder these, put in sockets. What we also need to do is to desolder these, U7 and U8, which are 74257s, which are used as multiplexers for the RAM, I think. And yeah, we have to desolder these because we have to connect some of the pins in a different way, which we are going to see. So we're going to desolder these and socket them. So I'm firing up the desoldering station for this. If you don't have a desoldering station, there are ways of doing this. This is not going to be a soldering tutorial, so I'm not going to get into this. You can use like a hand pump, or you can use solder wick. Yeah, whatever works for you. I used the desoldering station because I found it's the safest way to do this without damaging the board. There's always ways to fix the board, like with little wires and solder bridges and stuff, should you manage to destroy it. So don't panic. This is not an easy thing to do. Desoldering these chips is not trivial if you haven't done it before. As I said, if you don't feel confident doing this, don't do it. And what I'm going to do is to mark which chips I'm going to desolder on the back side of the board, because that helps me not desoldering the wrong chip. So we want to desolder U8 and U7. U7 is this one, and U8 is this one. I think. Yes, it is. Looks good. So I'm going to put a bit of flux. This is the stuff I use, Adsin FL112, which is liquid flux. You can use any flux you have. I'm just putting this on the pins here because it helps desoldering as well. You can also use, you add fresh solder, of course. That makes things even easier most of the times. So as you can see on this one here, there's a ground connection that, yeah, I didn't manage to desolder properly with the desoldering station yet. So what I'm going to do is take my regular soldering iron and add some solder, some fresh solder to this joint here, and let the heat go through there, through the whole PCB, and then I'm trying again to desolder it, which should work a lot better. What I usually do is to wiggle the pins after desoldering, and this way I can determine which ones are loose, and if they are not, if they are hanging by a little piece of solder there, like this one does, I think. Oh no. You break that loose. with this method. So now this should be, I think it should just come out, really. Let's see. Yeah. And you shouldn't have to use too much force, otherwise you are going to lift pads. This came out nicely, okay. It makes sense to be really careful. We want to be able to reuse these, apparently. In some C16s, might be worth mentioning that in some C16s that were made later, they already have 32 kilobyte RAM chips in here. They work the same, just have more memory, and if that isn't addressed, they are still working as 8 kilobyte chips. So make sure to check that before. It might be unnecessary for you to desolder these if they are already 32 kilobyte chips. We are going to have to desolder the MUX multiplexer chips anyway. So U7 and U8 are next. Let's do that. And as you can see, this went pretty well. I can't see any lifted pads or any broken traces, so I probably did a reasonable job. If you want to be sure, you can of course measure all the traces to the next point where you can measure and stuff, and determine whether or not you broke a trace or a pad. I'm pretty confident that this looks good. Inspected it very closely by eye, and I'm satisfied with this, so I'm going to fit some sockets. Unfortunately, I have two different kinds of sockets for these number of pins, which are 18 pins and what is it, 16 pins. Yeah, 16 pins for the small logic chips and 18 pins for the RAM chips. I have these dual wipe sockets which basically grab the IC lag from both sides, and I have these precision round sockets that basically grab it from all sides at the same time. I prefer these actually, especially for an installation that is more permanent, which is what we are going to do here. These are great for when you have to plug and unplug stuff often. And yeah, these are easier to plug and unplug stuff from, but these usually make better contact, so I prefer these for a job like this, and in general. You want to make sure to put them in the right orientation. They have a little notch usually, and on the PCB there's a little marking where that notch is supposed to go, so they are all going notch in the left direction from where I'm standing here. So yeah, I'm just going to solder the sockets in there, and what I usually do is to hold them from one side and solder in one leg or two legs from the other side, hold them down while I'm doing this. You can easily burn your fingers doing this, but you make sure that they sit flat on the board, which is of course desirable because it looks neater and you can be sure they make good contact this way. Okay, that looks reasonably good, I'd say. Let's just wash away some of the flux with some isopropanol or any other kind of circuit board cleaning stuff you have handy. And there's our sockets. Looks a bit weird, admittedly, with the different kinds of sockets, but it is going to work fine. So I'm just going to put the RAM chips in here, the 4464s that I have here. No, that's the old ones. These are the new ones. And yeah, they are just like, they just plug into the sockets here. These are, I think they were salvaged from the C64 that I was working on. Supposedly work, I'm not quite sure, but they should. There we go, these are in. it's pretty tricky putting these in, especially in the rounded pin sockets, especially if these have been desoldered like these are. You can still get new old stock ones or pulled ones that were sitting in sockets before, so you get clean ones still. On the multiplexer chips that go into these sockets later, we have to do some work. We have to bend up pin 2 on U7 and pin 14 on U8, which are then going to be connected elsewhere on the board to be able to address the extra memory, because they are just tied to 5 volts. Usually we have to bend the pins up so they are not making contact with the socket anymore. I'm going to show that in a second. So we are going to reuse the multiplexer chips that were in there originally in this case. It makes sense to get new ones. You can still get these in the exact same package, like dual inline package. And it is recommended because these fail frequently, especially if you have MOS branded chips in there. They are very famous for failing. These should be okay. They were still okay when I last checked. So what we are going to do on these, we are just going to use these. You can use new ones if you want. I'm going to bend up pin 2. You basically start counting in the upper left corner here, which is upper left judging by the little notch. Pin 1 is always the upper left next to the little notch here. So we have to use pin 2, which we're going to bend up. Be careful because these pins easily break off, so that's probably enough. You can use a little pair of pliers or something for this. So we have bent this pin and now we are going to put it in the socket. Carefully. We're probably going to bend this pin a bit further up, because we are going to solder to it later. And on the other one we need to bend pin 14 up. So pin 14 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. It's the third one from the top on the right. And into the socket it goes carefully. Always make sure you have the right direction. And you have straightened the pins. Except for the one we bent, obviously. So, okay. This should be a piece of cake kind of thing. There we go. We are going to have to connect these two pins we just bent up to the upper address lines, which are A14 and A15. And on this board, you can either use the processor or you can use the PLA to access these lines, but there's another spot where they are quite easily accessible, and that's these 6 vias next to the RF modulator, and the leftmost 2 of those are the points we want to solder to. And I'm going to put a pin header on there, so as I said, this is going to be reversible by unplugging these chips, putting the original chips back in, and yeah, basically this is not going to be switchable, but we can just unplug a plug that we are going to make for this, and we're going to solder in a little header here to be able to reverse this, should it be necessary, which I don't really think it will, but yeah, it's better to do it this way than to cut traces, I guess. So we need to free the 2 vias of any solder. For that purpose, I'm just using more solder here. And then I'm using some solder braid or solder wick to basically suck the solder out. Now I'm basically putting in an angled pin header, so something like this, so I can just plug and unplug the 64K mod. The spacing should be the correct spacing. Yeah, it is actually. There we go. Doesn't look too bad. So we're soldering this in. So now let's build a little connector. So we basically need one wire this length, and we need another wire this length approximately. And I'm going to try something new for this channel at least, and for me. I bought a cheap crimping thing and a set of crimp connectors of the size we need. So we need one with 2 contacts, there we go. And we need 2 of these things. Basically this should give us, I can just break them off I think. Yeah. There we go. And we can basically make our own connector now. This of course works for more connections as well. So it's gotta be quite the good tool for stuff like this. So let's see if I can manage to do this. Need to put the wire. Yeah, this can just be put in there afterwards. So we need to put the wire in here, yes. Yeah, that's better. Nice, actually. Yeah, that's good. Okay, that makes a very sturdy connection, it seems. Yeah, that worked. Okay, now we should have 2 connectors that we can put in the little, like 2 crimped connections that we can put in this little plug. Okay. Look at this, we made our first crimped connector. I wouldn't say it is 100%, but it's my first try at doing this ever. And I did it on camera. Worked reasonably well. Let's see if it makes contact. Okay, looks good. Now we basically have to connect this. And I think U7 is the left one. Okay, let's see. So this should go around here. And we're just soldering these onto the legs. Okay, not too bad. Here's how this looks now. We have the white one is the left one on here. I'm not sure which one is which, but we can just reverse the polarity of the plug basically. Should this not work. Yeah, the green one is the right one here. And we have our muxes connected. Looks pretty tidy, I must say. It's not too bad, especially for a mod done by me. Yeah, just make sure you don't short out anything with the wires here. And probably could route this even neater, like so or something. You could, of course, put some heat shrink tubing over these pins. I'm just gonna cut them a bit afterwards, like the pointy bits of the pins, so that there's no protruding bare contacts anywhere in the case. Although this should be fine, like this. Let's just see if this really gives me 64 kilobytes of RAM. Fingers crossed this worked. fingers crossed. Hey! First try! Nice! So yeah, we have 60K of basic RAM, which means we have 64K of general system RAM, which means this mod did work. Nice! So we should now be able to play most of the games made for the Plus 4 on this one, or virtually all games, I guess. And yeah, I'm just going to put this back into the case and check out some stuff. Hey, and it still works after reassembling, so that's a good sign. Let's try some software that supposedly only works on the Plus 4. And it does in fact work, which is awesome, of course. So let's see if I have the correct joystick port here. Controls. Oh, joystick, okay. Yay! And I can actually play this Christmassy game, which is, I'm a bit late for Christmas, I guess. But at least this is a 64K only game, and it now works. Which is awesome. Yeah, so this was a success. I hope this was informative and maybe inspired you to do something like this yourself. You can look up better instructions probably than this video in the video description below, and would be great to see you on this channel again. I'm Jan Peter, thanks for watching, see you next time, bye!